Do I think the music of Bach is for everyone? That's a complex question.
Yeah, I do believe that.
I am strongly in the camp of yes, I do think it's for everybody, no matter how young you are, no matter how old you are.
I mean, it brings up a lot of other questions. I think my visceral immediate response would be, well, of course, yes, all music is for everyone.
I think if it isn't for everyone, it's a pity that it isn't.
It teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you something about other people. It teaches you, something about why we're here, about human existence.
I think that there's something that you're going to find.
I know that my engagement with the music has made me a more nuanced thinker, a more just able to absorb complex emotions in ways that, it's partly that I've gotten older too, but I think Bach can be that.
Hi, I'm Nick Phan, and this is Bach 52. On this week's episode, I have a conversation with Grammy-nominated countertenor Reginald Mobley. Reggie is a dear friend and an extraordinary colleague. We met many years ago singing at the Oregon Bach Festival together, and so it's the music of Bach that brought us together as friends and colleagues. Our conversation was wide-ranging, starting with how Reggie feels that Bach was one of the primary influences on his musical life as a child growing up in Gainesville, Florida, and how his music is one of the key things that set him on the path to being a musician and living the life that he's lived. He also talked in our conversation about how he thinks this idea that Bach may not be for everyone is elitist and touches on issues of access and equity for him. He relates a lot of personal stories about how he was told growing up that this music wasn't for him, it was for other people. And how, despite that, he's come to discover that this music, Bach's music in particular, is one of the primary ways he is best able to express himself through music. So in addition to watching this episode, definitely be sure to check out Reggie's singing on his website, which is located in the description below. And be sure to check out his latest album, Because, which was nominated this year for the Grammy for Best Classical Solo Vocal Album. And also be sure to check him out on my most recent album, Stranger, where we perform Nico Muley's duet for countertenor and tenor, Lorne Is My Liking. There's also a video that's linked in the description below to that piece. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I was really moved by the things Reggie had to say and was so generous to offer about his life in music and his experiences with Bach. Also, be sure to stick around for the aria at the end of this episode, taken from Cantata 36, Die Liebe zieht mit sanften schritten, for tenor and oboe. Hi, Reggie.
Hi, Nick.
This series is, we've talked about this. The series is basically poking at this question, do you think the music of Bach is for everyone? And it's a big question. But let's start with some basics first, because I just want to make sure people know who you are and how you got into the music of Bach. You and I met singing Bach.
Yes.
We met at the Oregon Bach Festival.
We did.
And, so Bach is pretty central to our friendship and our working relationship, even though we do tons of other things together. Can you just start off by telling us, how did you get started singing and how did the music of Bach enter your life?
So Bach was pretty much an early influence in my training, in my my path into music. I, of course, like every Black queer countertenor, I had the similar origin story of starting up singing in a small church choir, gospel choir. But when I was old enough to decide whether or not I wanted to continue singing, I decided not, because I wanted to play with Transformers. I just didn't like singing. But my 6th grade year, I joined the concert band at my middle school. And we played 3 things that first semester: Baby Elephant Walk, Kokomo, and a transcription of a Bach prelude and fugue in C. I knew Kokomo, I loved the Beach Boys. Baby Elephant Walk I'd heard before, but I hadn't heard Bach before, or I hadn't known Bach before. And the first time we played through this fugue terribly, I was done. Like, it was a grand epiphany. Like, there was something that just clicked in me that I never thought I would experience in music like this. I didn't know what I was hearing or what I was doing, but there was something about a fugue that just completely possessed me. From that point forward, I would go to the public library, Gainesville, Florida, where I'm born and raised, and I would check out every cassette and CD of music that had Bach's name on it. And I was insatiable. Like, that was all I could do from that point forward. And even though I stopped playing formally in the band once I got to high school, I always kept with Bach and all the music that was lumped in with recordings of him, which meant Handel, which meant Vivaldi, which meant Albinoni and other Baroque greats. And by the end of my high school career, I had rejoined the chorus and decided that I wanted to pursue a life in music. Before then, I was planning to be an artist or an architect. My high school was a drafting school, a magnet school for drafting and architecture. And I was in that program, and I was also in AP art program. So I had a full ride to a school in graphic arts. But my mother convinced me to apply for an HBCU, Oakwood College, which is now Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. And I applied, and not only did they accept my scholarship, but they actually matched my art scholarship for music. And so I went to Oakwood on a trumpet performance scholarship. Didn't touch the trumpet a single day. I didn't even bring it with me. I immediately switched to voice and took lessons, and the big work we did that year was Messiah, and then everything just went from there. But every chance I could, I always found a library or found a recording and went back to Bach. For some reason, he became, from that moment in 6th grade, even till now, he became that almost friend that has just kind of been there as a part of my life through all of my experiences, and I assume always will be.
Wow. So a Bach fugue in middle school band.
And it's not even Bach. I found out later when I tracked it down that it was Kuhnau.
Oh, but you were being told it was
I
Bach.
was told it was Bach. But I did then, from that point forward, find real Bach. And from that point forward, like, I can tell the difference now. I think I've grown in my education, but that prelude and fugue still holds a special place in my heart.
How interesting. So the form was the gateway drug.
It was.
Amazing. And so were you always a countertenor, or did you start as a different voice type?
Oh, absolutely not. I was a baritone. I started as one of those Zwischen baritoners. My teacher always thought that I was going to be of the Domingo type of being able to be a baritone with a very high extension, and I was going to have a brilliant career. Every Italian aria she could give me at an appropriate age, she always did. And I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. I found it constricting. I found it difficult. And it was when I went back to Florida, I was at the University of Florida, and I was taking lessons there with Jean-Renaud Lafond, who is a wonderful teacher, that he heard me singing. I joined a barbershop quartet in college, collegiate quartet, Station 59, and we competed internationally, and we won the gold medal in 2000. And he heard us practicing downstairs and just singing it in the common area. And I sang the tenor line, which is, of course, the top line, which is basically an alto line. And when he knew that we were done, he grabbed me by the arm and dragged me up 3 flights of stairs to his office, which is great for an asthmatic. And he basically had me sing through a scale. He had played an E-flat major scale, and I sang it the octave below as I thought I was supposed to. He said, no, sing where I play. And so I said, okay, and sang this scale, and he warmed me down, warmed me up, and then stopped and basically said, do you know what you are? I was like, no, am I in trouble? He's like, no, you're a countertenor. You are absolutely a countertenor. And I'm really so happy about that. And I, of course, this kid from Gainesville, Florida, I said, well, what's a countertenor? And he said, well, you're also an idiot, but here is a stack of CDs of countertenors that he had in his office. And he said, go home, listen to this, when you come back to your lesson next week, this is what you'll be doing for the rest of your life.
That is wild. It seems like you've been the way you're describing it, it sounds like you've been pulled towards this life as a countertenor who focuses in on the music of Bach. Is Bach still a primary focus of your work these days?
Intended, yes. There's still something about Bach that I feel most at home. I've never felt more at home than since singing the music of my tradition, of Black American tradition. So yes, it's definitely a huge chunk of what I do or try to do. Even in how my career has transitioned into also doing a lot of work in diversity and equity and activism, Bach is still somewhere in my tool bag.
So interesting. I feel a kinship with you in that way because, I feel like it's not obvious that I would feel at home in the music of Bach, but there's something about his music where I really do feel at home. And I had sort of a similar journey. I had people hearing me and thinking, oh, you're going to sing all this Rossini and bel canto. And I'm like, ugh, I don't really like that music. And I respect and admire the people who do it so well, and I respect the music for what it is, but it's not my cup of tea. And this sort of like more dramatic tradition that is really rooted in the music of Bach is like where I feel at home. But I'm like a queer half Asian guy from the Midwest. Like it seems very strange, like on its surface. And so it's interesting because I feel the same draw, and it does feel like home. And I don't know, it touches on this idea of like identity, which I feel like everybody is that's a conversation that everybody is kind of having around this music and kind of questioning. Many people, I think, question whether we need to, continue teaching it or, how central is it? And I think that's what's brought me to this series and this question of, do you think it's for everyone? Because I'm so curious to hear everybody's different perspectives. And so, since you so naturally brought us to that question, do you think the music of Bach should be for everyone? Is for everyone?
I think so. I think so through a process of elimination. Because to say that the music of Bach isn't for everyone, I think is constricting. I think it's limiting. I think it's elitist. And I think it's what got us the problem we have right now in regards to how classical music is seen and treated, particularly in the US.
Interesting. You say you think it's elitist, which is something I'm really curious to hear more about.
I think to say that Bach's music isn't for everyone is elitist. You can't own sound, ultimately. You can't hoard sound and the way we've arranged it. Yes, of course, the themes of Bach being mostly centered around Christianity, does that speak to every person around? No, there are always going to be issues, but the thing is that whether or not you listen to the music of Bach, whether or not you like it, whether or not you want it, that should be your choice. And that's what I mean by, is it for everyone? And by that I say yes, because it's your choice. You don't have to listen to Bach. You don't have to love Bach, but the music is there for you if you want it, if you decide to find it. And because I come from a time, and a place and tradition that music, we were literally told that was not for us. I lived the other side of that question for so long. I was raised by my grandparents, and whenever I finally started bringing classical music into the house, my grandmother would just become irate. She hated that funny music, that white people music, that music that represented the people that treated her a certain way as she grew up in the Deep South, in the first half of the 20th century. That was not for us. And that's what I was told, and that's how I was taught to think about classical music. And to hear, just to feel a fugue for the first time, and to feel a similar connection, an instinctual connection, just as I feel to gospel and spirituals and jazz and everything else, to me says that everything else is a lie. The music that speaks to me is obviously for me. And if you are a person who is of faith, I consider myself a pretty devout Christian, believe it or not. And I think that music, being a gift from God, can't be limited or withheld by anyone else. I think if it's something that works for you, then it is absolutely for you. And no one should be able to tell you otherwise. And that also means that if someone doesn't feel, if someone doesn't feel that Bach is for them, if someone doesn't like the music of Bach, then don't listen to it. You have so much more out there. But this organization of 12 tones that we've locked ourselves into through the Western European classical tradition, the way this one dude did it several hundred years ago absolutely speaks to me in a way that I don't think much else has. There is a practical magic, I think, in music. There is more to music than just art and entertainment, but also service. And I think there's something about Bach's music that creates a space for truly understanding not just the human element, but our frailty as well as our virtue in a way that no one else does. There's something about it that just truly speaks to me in that way. And perhaps it could be, I often talk a lot about how spiritual slave songs are also early music. I mean, by the fact that the 30 Years' War began in 1618 and the first slave ship hit Jamestown in 1619. I mean, these two things came up roughly at the same time. Granted, things went a lot longer here in the States, but post 30 Years' War, the generations after, there was still that almost instinctual and communal processing of grief and confusion and life through music, of Schütz and the Bach family and others around, Zelle as well. I mean, what else were African slaves doing but communicating and processing and finding a way through the horror of slavery, then through music, through song, and has continued past slavery, through Dred Scott, through civil rights, up till now. I mean, there is something that I think a lot of people have forgotten, and it's that music has that ability to continue to safeguard and kind of keep us whole, keep us human, keep us together. It links us and gives us a sense of strength and resilience that I don't think we truly appreciate in the 21st century. And so all that to say, absolutely, I think the music of Bach is for everyone.
I mean, that's beautifully said. I agree with you. In this day and age, we're not really inclined towards community in a bizarre way, because in some ways we're more connected than ever with the technology at our fingertips. I mean, the phones and, the social media.
The watches.
I know. I mean, it's extraordinary. We can connect with someone on the other side of the globe for free, basically, at the drop of a hat. And yet, somehow, this idea of community service and building community and using empathy and compassion to propel ourselves forward as a society seems to be missing. And I personally find that in the music of Bach, which, I mean, we know so little about him, but what we do know is that he did not really sound like a very compassionate person. He seemed like he was pretty cantankerous. But his music is filled with that, and I assume it's because of the faith that's behind it.
Yeah. I mean, you say cantankerous, but there had to be more to him as someone who loved wine and beer. And when musicians like Telemann came to Leipzig, he headed to the Bach house. I mean, we focus on one aspect a lot, and some focus on the idea of him being the fifth evangelist, but he was just a man. I mean, he was as human as the rest of us. I mean, some will claim that there may have been issues like paranoid narcissism and other sorts of, will retroactively apply these psychological conditions, and it seems pretty evident from some of his writings and letters, but we don't actually know. But what we do know is that he did have a family that he loved. He did have friends that he loved and things that he did. And obviously, paramount and chief among those things was his devotion to God, which was evident through his music. But But I think that there are some cantankerous people and some people who love beer who exist now who can connect to potentially who he was and find that in his music. I don't know. I think what you said before was absolutely brilliant, Nick. Because I think I never thought about that, but I think that's the problem. We can connect with literally everyone, but that doesn't mean we can understand everyone. We don't have the ability to connect ourselves through empathy and compassion to the person that is translated into text or someone on a Zoom screen. I think that's that human connection that comes through being able to connect with people is lost. And that's I never really thought much about that, but that's very true.
I think about it all the time. I mean, it's interesting because, I was talking to Jeremy Dank recently in one of my last interviews, and one of the things that he said is he thinks that the music of Bach is actually quite current right now with young people in his experience, because there's something so algorithmic about it and something so mathematical and sort of technological about the way it's constructed that it has this sort of appeal to the current moment. And I think that description of his music is spot on. That is kind of how it's composed. But it's interesting, it also does, because it's music, as you say, it's this gift. It's filled with emotion and drama, and in ways that, the actual technology at our fingertips, I'm not sure is totally engendering all the time. You said the music of Bach felt like home. I think that's a gift. But I mean, and what other ways has his music kind of influenced and changed your life?
Aside from his music feeling like home, feeling familiar, feeling like something I knew or know, there's just so much more than just the emotional, base connection that I feel. I mean, as you just said before, there is that technological aspect to it. There is that the magic in numbers that occurs in Bach's music. And more than that, his ability to set text is next to none, in my opinion. I mean, we talk about Lieder forever. We talk about, Schubert and Brahms and Wolf, but we never talk about Bach in that same way. But when Bach sets a word, when he sets a line, the music itself says it as well. I mean, this is why I hate memorizing, is because I also love just seeing the movement of the notes and the way it shapes and contours, and even more so if you get a chance to actually perform with copies of the manuscript, just to see how he literally draws the phrases and directions in the very bars and how he ties the notes. I mean, it's all there. Like, I don't speak German fluently, but I'm able to communicate it just based on how the music is set. I'm able to bring those concepts behind the words and phrases forth just by how incredibly masterfully he sets these lines. I mean, thinking of singing as an evangelist, as well as anyone, how the way he sets even the cock crowing is, I mean, it's a masterstroke.
Yeah, no, I mean, the efficiency in those notes, there's so few of them in the evangelist writing, but like they contain worlds and invite so much of your imagination. I mean, you're right, you don't in a way have to speak the language because he's done such a great job of giving you all the clues in the music. You sing his music in concert halls and in like the great, in churches and whatnot all over the world. Have you taken his music into places into communities where it's not necessarily assumed that his music would be played?
I've sung Bach arias I've taken it home and I've sung them in church.
What is that experience like in Gainesville?
It's interesting. It's not what I would have expected. I'm always a little nervous, how they're going to not just perceive the music of Bach in a small Black Seventh-day Adventist church in the Deep South, but also perceive me as a countertenor, because it's still very rare to encounter one in certain areas. And the idea of a male singing in a higher register, there's still that stigma as well. So those two things together, I come in with a lot of nerves, and I always leave these experiences feeling like a complete fool for feeling that way in the first place, because that's never the case. If you just bring this music honestly, and even if you say a little bit about it before you sing it, just to give some context to a congregation that does not speak German, they're never anything but appreciative. They're never anything but loving of the music that I sing of Bach. And I realized that all that pressure was completely self-imposed. That no one cares that I sing an octave higher than they expect me to when I walk on stage. As a matter of fact, they're more understanding and accepting of it than most audiences in classical spaces, here and in Europe. I mean, I still get the football player, I still get the "I thought you were a bass," I still get the rugby player. I mean, the past several months of singing in mainly in Europe, mainly in France and England, I got as much or more than I have in the States in years. So as long as you are convinced of it, I don't see why there's ever going to be any issue of Bach not being appreciated in an unknown, unusual space. I've sung a cappella in an open mic night when I was at a bar or a pub, and I realized that people do love music. If you don't patronize them and treat them as though they won't understand or love what you have to share with them, again, this sequence of 12 tones, I mean, however you organize it, I think as long as the intent is there and we truly give our all, we're allowed ourselves to be vulnerable and put Reggie in that experience as I'm also giving them this music of Bach, then people, I've never had an issue. I'm sure there are places I haven't taken it so I can't say for sure. I have sung Bach in a jazz club. That's true. I sang Cantata 54, Wieder stehe doch der Sünde, with a small group in bright clothes in the middle of a jazz club in New Orleans. And as deafening an applause and appreciation as you would hear anywhere else. As many people coming up to you after and buying you drinks as anywhere else. I mean, it's music. It can and should exist everywhere. We're the ones who kind of place those rules and bars and put ourselves in boxes.
I do wonder if, yes, it's interesting how you say like some of it is self-imposed. I would argue that some of it is also imposed by society and like the heteronormative white patriarchal norms that are imposed upon all of us.
Our favorite.
Apparently. It's stuck around for a long time. Your response to the question in some ways says that even though at first you might feel apprehensive about going into a sort of quote unquote unfamiliar space for the music of Bach, in a way that ends up feeling more comfortable sometimes than the places that we think of as the traditional Bach space. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
And how does that feel? How does that feel to have people respond that way with, sort of asking you if you're a bass or why aren't you a football player or what, all of these.
How do I feel about microaggressions? That's a completely different conversation because I'm upset. I'm usually pretty ticked off by it, and not because of the slight of microaggression itself, but because I don't like the fact that some people are more focused on how I look, that they're missing the very thing, the very message, the very music I'm there to bring to them. That they wouldn't allow themselves the chance to look past what they see and allow themselves to perhaps embrace what they hear. And I get upset because they didn't open themselves up to it. But also, I also am upset at myself because I feel like I failed in being able to, share this art, this music, this message, this whatever I'm presenting. Otherwise, I just let it slide off my back. Because it's happened, I mean, to the point now that even my website, I use one of those quotes at the head of my website to show that I'm just not letting it bother me anymore. Because one reviewer, one person who says a completely ignorant thing will never, ever really darken the fact that there are 5 people who are still moved by what happened in that space. Like the person saying that I didn't sing something correctly, or that I flubbed a word, or they didn't like me compared to a female contralto. I don't care about that. I care about the person that, can't open their mouth because they're still crying. Like, as long as I reach a person, as long as I reach someone, I guess that's what I take with me at the end of the day. I can leave everything else on the table. I mean, it will, of course, it does well up eventually when it comes up again. But for what I want to do, that's all I want to keep. That's all I want to take with me, is how it affects people positively.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's such an important thing for people to consider in these conversations about DEI. Everybody just wants to sit around and say, I just want the best singer, as if that's some sort of simple metric that we can all easily arrive at, and sort of ignorant of the hugely subjective nature of what we do and who we are as singers and how we're assessed. We all have biases, including reviewers, including audience members, and those things stand in the way. I really appreciate your generosity in taking the time to do this, and also just being willing to share so much of your experience and willingness to be so open about it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's what music has taught me to be. I'm a textbook Southerner. I don't tell people what I have in my coffee, but music, especially us being singers, being vocalists, is the thing that's required of us is to teach ourselves to be open and vulnerable. Because if we can't do that on stage, then I think we fail. Because people connect to that. People need to connect to that person on stage. And even if it's a role or just, an oratorio or a recital, if you're not willing to be vulnerable, then I think you're really kind of not giving your all. You're not really doing your full job. And you can tell, the people who are capable of doing that. And
for the record, you never fail at doing it. So
thank you.
Thanks, Reggie.
Yeah.
The cantata for this week's episode is taken from Cantata 36, Schwingt freudig euch empor, which has an interesting history because Bach repurposed a lot of movements from another cantata with the same name that he composed for a secular occasion. It was the birthday of a professor at the University of Leipzig. Cantata 36 was composed for the first Sunday in Advent. And the Bible reading that Sunday is taken from the Gospel according to St. Matthew and tells the story of Christ's entry into Jerusalem, where people greeted him with palm fronds and laid cloaks down at his feet, at his donkey's feet, so that he wouldn't have to touch the ground as he entered the city. The aria is the third movement from the cantata, Die Liebe zieht mit sanften schritten, and it's composed for tenor and oboe d'amore. The text of the aria is, love approaches his beloved with gentle and slow steps. Just as a bride is delighted when she beholds her bridegroom, so a heart follows after Jesus. The choice of the oboe d'amore makes a lot of sense in this aria as an obbligato instrument, which basically is a duet for oboe d'amore and tenor. You have this imagery of two musical voices navigating this beautiful winding path. And the Aria's text is all about how our souls should aspire to love Jesus and to be united with Christ in an everlasting way, much like a marriage. So picking an instrument with the word love built into its name is a pretty logical and beautiful choice for the aria.
Zieht mit sanften Schritten. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Gleich wie es eine Braut entzückt, wenn sie den Bräutigam erblicket, so folgt ein Herz auch Jesu nah. Gleich wie es eine Braut entzückt, wenn sie den Bräutigam erblicket, so folgt ein Herz auch Jesu nach, so folgt ein Herz auch Jesu, so folgt ein Herz auch Jesu nach. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu geliebtes Allgemach. Die Liebe zieht mit sanften Schritten sein treu sanften